in the morning sends the sun high in the sky. Who would hide from heaven's glory? Who would pass the challenge by? La 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 la.
There's a morning for every nation when the sun's high in the sky. There's a time for every people to affirm their destiny. La 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 la.
Even so, all of us together can create a better land. Lead a past and new tomorrow waits for all who understand. There's a morning for every nation when the sun's high in the sky. There's a time for every people to affirm their destiny. La 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 la. Even so, all of us together can create a better land. Leave the past, a new tomorrow waits for all who understand. La 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 la. Leave the past, a new tomorrow waits for all who understand. Life is a dream, time like a stream, carries our burdens away. Never despair, joys everywhere, love can befriend you today. Free from all care, like birds on the air, soar above griefs and worries, seek joy and be gay.
Often on earth, things of great worth, worldly ambitions defy. Sometimes a friend helps us ascend up from life's cares to the sky. Love is a star, though shining afar. It can guide us and help us toward light to draw nigh.
Life is a dream, time like a stream, carries our burdens away. Never despair, joys everywhere, love can befriend you today. Free from all care, like birds on the air, soar above griefs and worries, seek joy and be gay. Often on earth, things of great worth, worldly ambitions defy. Sometimes a friend helps us ascend up from life's cares to the sky. Love is a star, though shining afar. It can guide us and help us toward light to draw nigh. Love is a star, though shining afar. It can guide us and help us toward light to draw nigh.
I first want to bow to the great masters of this path, Babaji, Lahiri Mahashaya, Sri Yukteswar, Paramahansa Yoganandaji, and our great teacher, Swami Kriyanandaji. I humbly bow to them all. And I bow also to the God that resides in each of you. God is omnipresent in this universe. Tonight we're going to talk about how Kriya Yoga can change your destiny. But we don't mean by the term Kriya Yoga only the technique of Kriya Yoga. We want to talk also about the essence of the whole of the spiritual path, the whole reason that we're alive as human beings. And so when we talk about destiny, we want to talk not only about the destiny of what is going to happen to us in the next year or the next 2 years, or what is going to be our destiny for this lifetime, because the teachings of India talk about us as a soul that reincarnates over and over and over again. Paramahansa Yoganandaji, when we refer to him, we'll refer to him as master, not because he wanted mastery over other people, but because he was a master of his own self. He had become united with his true nature. He had become united with the God that was manifest in him and the God that is manifest in all of us. You know, he taught, and this is a very important truth, he taught that there is no difference between these great masters. There's no essential difference between Babaji, between Krishna, between Paramahansa Yoganandaji. It is God manifest in each of these. The essential difference is not one of essence. It's that they know who they are. And we are yet struggling to find that truth. Yoganandaji said that this life, each person's life, is we come into this life for our education and entertainment. But he said, how few are either educated or entertained. And so if we get too caught up in life, see, Yogananda would sometimes bring his disciples to a movie. And in those days, the movies were in black and white, so it makes the analogy a little more clear. So the drama would be going on, and right at the most dramatic moment, perhaps the great tension, the whatever was the drama, just as it was about to resolve, he would tap the disciples on the shoulder, and he would say, look up at the beam of light. You see, it's all just the light making a play of light and dark on the screen. And there must be light and dark, otherwise there's no movie. If it's all white, there's no drama. If it's all black, there's no drama. There has to be this interplay of light and dark in order for the drama to go on. And so it is with us. There's always an interplay of light and dark, of good and bad. God creates this world through the power of duality. So through the power of light and dark, pleasure and pain, and so on. Master and Swamiji used to tell us an example of this. They said that when God created the world, he first created it, and then he created mankind, but he created mankind in a perfect form. And being perfect, they sat down, they meditated for a minute or two, and they merged back into God, and the whole world went out of existence. God scratched his head and said that didn't work too well. So he tried it again, and the same thing happened. A minute or two of meditation, they merged back into God. He said, I have to do something about this. And so he created the power of delusion, the power of Maya, the power of differentiation. And then when the first people were born, they were caught up in this duality. They were caught up in the drama of life. And for you and for me, we're caught in the drama of life. And one of the great secrets of happiness is to at least not be so caught up in the drama that we have no reference point. To pull back a little bit from it and to see it as a learning experience. If we can do that, if we can see everything that comes to us as coming for our own good, as coming for our own learning experience. We have a friend who lives in Delhi, and he was a Supreme Court justice, a very, very fine devotee. He's now in his early 90s. But he told us that more than 60, maybe 70 years ago, when he was a youth, he attended the most memorable lecture of his entire life. And so he had to pay some amount of money to come in, and there was a group of people. And the teacher, the master, came out onto the stage, and he said, "Everything that happens to you is meant to come to you in order to provide the next step for your spiritual growth." And then he walked off the stage. And our friend, of course, was a little bit surprised. 5 minutes passed. The master came back on stage, said, "Everything that happens to you is meant to come to you as to prepare you for the next stage of your spiritual growth." And he walked off the stage. 5 minutes later, he came back. He said the same thing, and that was the end of his lecture. Now, 60 years later, our friend Indu remembered that lecture. I am saddened to say, I doubt that any of you 60 years later are going to remember the words of this lecture. But perhaps you'll remember the tone of the lecture, the direction of the lecture, because each of us, everything that happens to us, each of us has a destiny. Each of us has an individual destiny, but more importantly, the human race as a whole has a destiny. So Master used to say that there is no difference between the greatest master and the worst sinner. No difference in essence. The difference is only the amount of realization that person has. And so the quest of our life is the quest for ever greater realization. And as Master said that this world was for our education and entertainment, we can think of any single life as being like one day in school. So imagine that we're all in the second form, the third form, and this life is just one day in that. And if we come to the teacher and we say to the teacher, "Tell me my destiny, tell me my destiny," meaning what is going to happen to me today, the teacher, having the longer viewpoint, will tell a longer story of the destiny. So let me talk a little bit first about the destiny of our soul. Before I do that, I want to say about foreseeing the future, or talking about the destiny. Our son works with a man who invented the whole industry of underwater robots, the robots that go down into the oil wells and go deep under the ocean to do repair jobs. This man has a good sense of humor. He was giving a talk, and someone asked him the reason for his success, and he said, "Well, the reason for my success is that I'm a visionary. I can very, very clearly see what is going to happen in the future." He said, "Unfortunately, my vision only lasts for about 15 minutes, meaning he could only foresee what was happening for 15 minutes into the future. So for us, we get caught up in too much of the drama. We get caught in the movie of our life. We get attached to the results of that movie. And because of that, we experience perhaps great fear, great anxiety, suffering. We also experience joy, or at least happiness. And so we reach out for trying to keep the experience of duality, the light and the dark. We try to make the light increase and the dark go away. We try to do that for our lives. We try to do it. And unfortunately, the way that we try to do that is what gets us in trouble. Because we think that we can fix the picture of creation by adjusting the environment, by adjusting other people, by adjusting things outside of ourselves. An American writer said that there are many, many people who would like to serve God, mostly in an advisory capacity. And so the drama that comes to us, we should just accept that as this is what is coming, perfectly designed for our spiritual advancement. Illness, success, failure, death even, birth, all of these things, all of that drama is coming in this one lifetime that's like one day in our student curriculum. It's coming to us to help us learn. And so the longer drama of our soul is more important than the short-term drama of this life. But fortunately, these great teachings, including Kriya Yoga, help us not only with that long term, that long arc of incarnation after incarnation, thousands of incarnations it takes for us to finally realize once and for all our unity with God. Swami Kriyananda used to say that the essence of Sanatana Dharma, the essence of eternal righteousness is this, that we all came from God and our destiny ultimately is to merge back into God. So we all came out of God and we are going through experiences which will gradually awaken us until we merge back, until we realize ultimately that we are one with the Creator and that has always been our destiny. And so God creates the soul, which has this very, very long arc of incarnation after incarnation after incarnation. And that soul, like a person watching the movie, gets entranced in the drama, gets entranced in what is happening, and gets attached to one result and not the other result. And when the soul gets attached to this separation, that's the ego. Master said the ego is the soul attached to the body and the personality. And so in this one lifetime, even though the soul has incarnated many, many times before and may incarnate again in life after life until we realize Him, in this one lifetime, there's a miasma over us and we forget who we are and what this drama is. Swami Kriyananda used to tell a story about Krishna and Narada. They were walking along, and Narada said, "Please, Master, tell me, why is it that we get caught up in this drama? Why is it that we forget who we really are?" And Krishna said, "I'll tell you, but I'm a little thirsty. Please, first, before I tell you, go to that village there and bring me a glass of water." And so Narada said, "Certainly, Lord, certainly, Lord." And he goes and he comes to the village and he knocks on a door to ask for a glass of water. And this beautiful young woman answers the door. And they look into each other's eyes and it's as if there's a soul union. And then he falls in love immediately. And the young woman is the daughter of the headmaster of the village. And Narada asked for her hand. And the headmaster said, well, yes, I'll give you my daughter in marriage. You're obviously a noble person. But you must promise to become the headmaster of the village after I pass away. And so Narada agrees to that. And they marry. They have 3 children. And their life is going along with all of its ups and its downs. And one day the rains start. And I don't need to tell Hugh and Chennai what happens when the rains continue. And so there's a great flood. And the man Narada is now, he's trying to, the flood waters have risen and they're trying to escape. And so he has one child on each shoulder. He has the oldest child in one hand and his wife in the other hand. And they're going through, the flood waters are so strong that the child in his left hand is swept away. And Narada turns to save him. And in doing so, the wife is swept away. And the other 2 children fall off his shoulders as he reaches. And they too are swept away. And he thinks, what is life worth anymore? I don't care whether I live or die. And he surrenders himself to the flood water. And some time passes, and he hears a voice calling him, Narada, Narada. And he looks and he sees brown all around him. And he thinks that it's the muddy waters that have receded. But then he sees that it's sand. And he hears this voice, Narada, Narada. I sent you an hour ago to get me a glass of water, and I find you sleeping in the sand. What is this? And so it is that we get caught in this drama and we lose sight of the great arc of our soul's destiny. This is true for everyone. But we all have this destiny of advancement, of spiritual advancement, toward enlightenment, toward our union. Remember, we came from God and we go back to God. And the soul is always hungry for that return to God. We will never, ever be satisfied with anything else. But that great desire for unity back with God, God is described by Adi Shankara as Sat Chid Ananda, existence, consciousness, and bliss. And so we're always after everlasting, perpetual existence, greater consciousness, and bliss. And that bliss, Master called it ever new, ever expanding joy, because we can imagine the state coming from our limited knowledge of even the most blissful place, even the best place to have a vacation and a rest. Master said after a month, even in the very most beautiful place, we begin to knock ourselves on the head and say, isn't there something more than this? It's like eating. You're satisfied for a little while, but then you grow hungry again. The hunger of the soul is for joy. Anandamoy Ma, the great spiritual teacher of the 20th century, great woman saint, I had the blessing to meet her. She said that the natural food of the soul is joy, and we will always be hungry until we feast on that joy. And then she went further to say that to her disciples, don't stop people from seeking wealth or seeking fame or seeking other things. She said they're starving, and this is the only way that they know how to feed themselves. So let them do that, but then also try to teach them how to find the food that they're really looking for, how to find the joy that our soul is looking for and that we will always look for until we find it, and we can find it only by reunion with God. That's the whole meaning of yoga. Yoga means union, joining together. And in the great sage Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras, he starts by saying, and now the very first sutra translated into English is, and now we come to the study of the science of yoga. And Master interpreted that, explained that. He said it was very important, that and now, the kind of thing you just skip over if you aren't alert to the deep meaning of it. He said because it takes a long, long time for the soul's journey and evolution to want to be free, to want to have this yoga. We're too entranced by the movie. We're enjoying the game, the ups and downs. And he said it takes a very, very, very long time and lots of experiences until, he said, all of these experiences of seeking happiness and finding it, and then finding that it's empty, seeking wealth, and finding it finally, maybe after incarnations, we get rich. And then we find, no, that didn't do it. That didn't fill this hole in my soul. That wasn't the joy that I wanted to feast on. That was a substitute for it. And so this goes on and on and on over thousands of incarnations until Yoganandaji said, and I love this phrase, he said, it takes on a kind of agonizing monotony, this seeking outside of ourselves. And when that seeking outside of ourselves begins to take on an agonizing monotony, we naturally still feel hungry. The soul is still hungry. But it has tried often enough to look for our happiness outside of ourselves. And so it says there must be another way, and that's when we truly come consciously onto the spiritual path. Yogananda said everyone in the world is on the spiritual path. It's just that most people aren't conscious of it. Everyone, that sage that gave the talk, everyone is getting those lessons that are preparing him for his next step on his spiritual journey. But most people haven't yet come onto the point of agonizing monotony where they say, but what is that journey? How can I find finally the fulfillment that I'm looking for? And when we come on to that level of consciousness, having tried so many, many, many thousands of other things that haven't worked, we say, if happiness is not outside of myself, if it's not in things, if it's not in fame, if it's not in relationships, if that gives me temporary but not permanent happiness, then where does happiness lie? And if it doesn't lie outside of myself, then the obvious answer, because our soul knows from its ancient memory, its ancient, one could call spiritual DNA, the soul knows that it came from a place of perfect bliss, and it wants to get back. So it says, if I can't find that outside, then I'd better look inside. And that's when we come consciously onto the spiritual path. And there are many paths that, looking inside, that lead to the same great ocean of awareness, the great ocean of consciousness from which we came. So I'm not trying to say that our path is the only path or that Kriya Yoga is the only way. Kriya Yoga is a very, very efficient way to find this. Because when we begin looking inside, We can look inside in various different ways. You can sit and you can kind of read a book and think about it a little bit, and you're still contemplating and looking, but there's a particular pathway that has been laid out by those who have tread this path before us. It's not religious, but it is spiritual. It's not religious, meaning it doesn't belong to a Buddhist or a Muslim or a Kriya Yogi or a Christian. None of those outer forms define the totality, but spirituality is the same for each and every soul. Remember, we came out of God, we are headed back to God. And so as we begin to tread that inner path of knowledge, then there becomes a kind of a universality to it. You know, the skin, everybody here looks different. Swami Kriyananda used to amusingly say, it's amazing what God could do with 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth. The amount of creativity, the amount of differentiation, every atom is created with individuality. That's the nature of God's creativity. But beneath our skin, we begin to look much more like each other. You know, a doctor who is going to perform a heart operation, and he has the patient there, perhaps ready to make the cut. That doctor doesn't ask, now tell me, I need to know in order to have a successful operation, is this a Buddhist heart or a Christian heart or a Muslim heart? Because I have to operate according to that. Of course not. A heart is a heart. A heart that loves. It doesn't matter what name we give to our love for God. It's the love that matters. So our heart must become open. But there's a particular pathway by which we ascend to the knowledge of self-realization. In Sanskrit, as most Vedic teachers would call it, and as Patanjali called it, that state of realization is called samadhi. And that's the highest state. Master, if you've read the autobiography of a yogi, wonderful. If you haven't, I echo Sri Kartikeyanji's plea to you, please, for your own good, pick up a copy of that book, because I have known thousands and thousands of people who have read that book, and many, a high percentage of them say that that book changed the course of their life. And so please pick that up. But in that book is a beautiful poem called Samadhi, where Master explains in a poetic verse this state of consciousness where we lose our individuality, we don't lose our I-ness, but we lose the sense of separation from the whole. And in the loss of that separation from the whole, we realize that we're a part of everything that is. That there is no grain of sand, there is no sparrow that falls, as he puts it, without my sight. Speaking of that, I read a beautiful story of something that happened to Anandamoyi Ma, this great saint. She was one of the great saints of the 20th century. She traveled, this was a disciple of hers who became one of her very close disciples, but when he first came to her, he was very restless, and he just was looking for someone who could help him overcome his restlessness. And he began to follow Anandamoyi Ma. And then he found that she hardly stayed 1 or 2 days in any one place. She was constantly on the move. And because we project onto others what we feel inside ourselves, he thought, she is so restless, she can't even stay one place for longer than 2 or 3 days. And then she said to a group of her disciples, I would like to go to this district, and it was near a lake. And so he and a few others entrained and were with her. And in the morning she said, let's go to the lake and have a picnic. And so they packed up a nice picnic lunch, and they carried a basket, and they walked to the nearby lake. And they were beginning to spread the blanket out on the ground, and just started to unpack the food from the basket. And Ma said, it's time to go. Well, you can imagine this young man being restless and judgmental already, probably hungry and waiting for his lunch. You can imagine his thoughts. He thought, can't she even stay long enough to have lunch? My goodness, what is this? But she got up and she began to go, so they hurriedly packed up. She walked a little ways, maybe 100 meters, and stopped under a tree. And just as she stopped under that tree, a little sparrow, a little bird, fell out of the tree and fell at her feet. She asked a young boy there, please hold that bird up in front of me. And the bird, he did. The bird looked into her eyes for about 1 minute, and then it flapped its wings and it died. And then she said to her followers, she said, the very reason that we have come to this district is I heard the call of that soul calling me, that soul wanted my darshan before it gave up the body and went on. And so this young man realized the love and the compassion of these great ones, how powerful it is. They come, Babaji comes, Master comes, Swami Kriyananda comes, not because they have any need, they aren't hungry anymore, but they have experienced that hunger, and they come in order to help us learn where we can turn to find the joy that our soul is looking for. And Babaji comes, and he has trained many, many great masters. Our master, Yoganandaji, was one of those. Master Yoganandaji said that Babaji was Krishna in a former lifetime. And so these great ones come in order to uplift humanity in general with teachings, and that's why he came and offered the science of Kriya Yoga. Because remember, we have to look back within to find what we're looking for. And Kriya Yoga is a very, very powerful technique for turning the consciousness back within, back into our own central nervous system. Master used to say that the true altar that we worship on is our own central nervous system. It isn't anything outside of ourselves. And we must go to that altar if we're going to find the light of God that we're seeking, because the candles on the altar, the arati that we do, the diya, all of those things are symbolic. They aren't the true light. The true light is the light of consciousness that resides within you and resides within me. But we don't see it through the two outer eyes. We see it through the single eye of intuition, the single eye of God union. And that single eye resides within us, not outside. And it turns the energy, the direction of the senses that bring our consciousness out, it turns that back within. Yoganandaji said that the different chakras, and I won't go into this, we have classes on this, but the different chakras are like searchlights that turn the energy of the consciousness out. But by the practice of an inward religion like Kriya Yoga awakens energy in the central channel of our being. Beyond the physical being, we have an astral being and a causal being, a spiritual aspect to ourselves. And in that central column lies the ability to uplift our consciousness and come into union with God. And so Kriya Yoga is a technique that powerfully helps us to withdraw our energy into our own deep central being and then lift it upward toward the light, toward the spiritual eye, the light of God that resides already. It resides within you and within me. When you are able to calm your mind and calm your heart, you will begin to see that light. And Kriya Yoga is a technique, a very efficient and powerful technique that allows us to withdraw our energy into our own inner self and to perceive our deeper aspect. Because the deeper aspect that we will perceive once our mind is calm, once our emotions are calmed and we don't want we've gotten a little bit of distance from all the likes and the dislikes that drive our mind into restlessness. When the heart is calm, when the mind is calm, then when we look within, we see the pure reflection of the divine that is residing within us. Master used to use the analogy of a full moon at night and many, many hundreds of pots. And you can look up and see that full moon, but you can only do that when you're realized. Otherwise, you have to see its reflection in a pot of water. And if there's a breeze that ruffles the surface of those pots, all you see are flickering lights that don't look much of anything like the moon. You have to calm the surface of that water, and then it becomes a pure reflection. And so it is with us. We need techniques that calm the emotions and calm the restlessness of our mind, the thinking process. And that is done by the interiorization of consciousness and through, in this case, what Patanjali says is first we must control the prana. And so Kriya is a kind of a control of prana, or pranayama, as it would be called in Sanskrit. And so by the practice of that, our minds become calm and focused, and then we see not outside of ourselves, but residing within ourselves. We see the pure reflection of that which we have always been. We see the pure reflection of God. And when we commune inwardly with the God within, and the God that resides within all of the universe, within every atom of creation, when we begin to commune with that great consciousness, then finally our soul begins to feast on joy, which is our own true nature. And only that joy will eventually satisfy us and fulfill us. And so all of life is a journey to that realization. And everything that happens to you with the sole purpose of preparing you for the next step on that great journey.